das Gebeten des Herrn, warte unser im Herrn, gehörig wer wird nehmen, da komme, dein Will geschehe, wie am Himmel auf Erden. Unser tägliches Brot gib uns heute, und vergib uns unsere Schulden, wie auch wir Herren uns schuldigen, und für uns nicht versuchen, sondern erlöse von dem Bösen. Denn dein ist dein Reich und die Kraft und die Heiligkeit und Freiheit. Amen. The story of my piano. The history of its use. The quality of its entity. And the preponderance of why we are selling it. How much of it does amount to history? That I watch you, and you see, what do you see? You see the piano being disregarded. You see it being sold. How much of what you say is what actually you did with it than what you do not want to do with it? There have been, in times past, some regard to the institution, for instance, of King Henry VIII, that his skills at killing. How are the skills of the Inquisition measured as any justification that onslaught of, per se, Rome to equate and measure and perform change, to encapsulate the whole of Europe into some Catholic state, can be measured by the interpretation that is placed now upon whether the king was right to kill those against him, or who was a traitor in the name of Thomas Cromwell or Thomas More, or who really does have sex in the name of your second wife at Anne Boleyn. There is a poem. There is a poem written by Heinrich Heine in approximately 1822, who lived, a German poet. Ich weiß nicht, was soll es bedeuten, dass ich so traurig bin, Märchen an euren Seiten. Das kommt mir nicht aus dem Sinn. Die Luft ist kühl und es dunkelt. Und ich fliegte dir rein. Das Geld fänkert in Abendsonnenschein. Die schon kann Jungfrau sitze dort üben wunderbar. Ihr goldenes Geschmäder Blise, die kommt ihr goldes Meer an. Which translated says, I cannot describe the meaning of sorrow, that fills my heart a fable of old through its streaming, allows my mind no rest. The air is cool in the gloaming, and gently flows the Rhine. Die Gipfel, die Berge von Kelt in einem Sonnenschein. The crest of the mountain is gleaming in fading rays of sunshine. Die schönste Jungfrau sitzt dort oben on the bar. The loveliest maiden is sitting up there, so wondrously fair. Ihr goldenes geschneide Blitze. Her golden jewelry is glistening. Sie kennt ihr Goddess, she combs her golden hair curls. Sie kommt is near a golden cannon. She comes with a gilded comb, preening. And sieht es Lied dabei, and sings a song passing time. Das hat ein wondrous Namen, Gettysburg-Rede. It has a most wondrous, appealing, and powerful melodic rhyme. That you ask, viewer, you ask about the likes of Mendelssohn, whose Fifth Symphony, the Reformation Symphony, was written by a Jew. It was completed before or after he died. You are left told of what inquisition is measured by such calamity that is told through the free speeches since the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg. In England, by all the freedom that was created by the aftermath of the English Revolution. How much about the Inquisition can you believe now? Any more than, for instance, you could believe about the Nuremberg war crime trial of 1940 after the war. And if you studied them, who would explain better why Hermann Göring is said to have taken his own life? Or who could prove more that he was not murdered? Who now doubts, and there are a few, who are doubting even the persona of Rudolf Hess, who allegedly was imprisoned in Spandau, but which equation is measured against the fact that this Russian-controlled prison was under some decree of state security and secrecy. That you judge Japan, a young lady combing her hair, as much beauty as it is almost sexual. And how far do you judge her as doing anything other than just combing her hair, that you already wondered why she does it? And you would deny that story of your piano, which is equated to, is it, the name on its lid? And the name of its lid you would describe or pronounce? Oh, we don't know about that. We don't know anything about it. Do you know how legitimate you are? Do you know the nature of the discontent that was sown by your mother, whose such quest for love made you, or whose ashamed depravity by such rape made you something more? Or how were you any less Catholic, then you are even now more Jewish. That by 1868, 21 years after the death of Felix Mendelssohn, this resurrection almost, isn't it? This Reformation symphony rears its ugly head. The man who wrote the songs without words. I had an uncle once, and his name was Uncle John. And this Uncle John bade paths of such righteousness in the halls of the rhetoric wisdoms of the church that he believed that the greatness of Mendelssohn's songs without words was as much what they didn't say as much as what they did say. And you have people in the shadow cabinet who are being told they should not turn up to vote for any vote in the Commons on what should be the future of the nuclear weapon. And you are being told that that is freedom. Or you are being told that to turn up is a breach of freedom. And what do you believe? And you read the Islamic State. You read that this Islamic State is establishment of a caliphate, a state governed in accordance with Islamic law or Sharia by God's deputy on earth, or caliph. And it seeks, they claim, or you seek claims, is to eradicate obstacles to restoring God's rule on earth and to defend the Muslim community or Ummah against infidels and apostates. The group has welcomed, you are told, the prospect of direct confrontation with US-led coalitions, viewing it as harbinger of an end-of-time showdown between Muslims and their enemies, described in Islamic apocalyptic prophecy. That this leader, who it is claimed, who is Ibrahim al-Habradi al-Samarai, who is better known, they say, as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and migrate to territory under its control, claim that he has two names. And which one of them, viewer, can you remember so much less easily than, for instance, Ribbentrop? How much do you propose to express in your freedom of voter the propensity that about your instrument is so fine as the piano that Challen wrote home about it, any sense by any, after the Battle of Waterloo, and created in any sense after the Civil War, how much they had invented that instrument which you have abandoned, or that you are playing so well. And you would explain that you don't need to play it on eBay because the fact that you are selling it. And how much do you propose the freedom or the righteousness that states that the police should be armed and to kill outright people holding a Kalashnikov? This makes sense, doesn't it, of the saying that wisdom almost goeth before the fall. And these are the proclivities of statesmanship, which had, for instance, around 18, some part of the Civil War, wasn't it? The American Civil War. And how many of you know whether that Civil War was 1776 or 1864? That has the President Abraham Lincoln stand up and say, may we continue this on the second fill? We are running a little out of space. That your piano demands it, doesn't it? Your piano demands it to be told what is the truth about its performance, its brand, and your fine description of it. We are about to find out what is the truth, aren't we? If she were to ask any one of you, what was the harpsichord, I guess there would be at least 65% of you who might say the harpsichord was the preclusion or the exclusive use of the wealthy of the 16th and 17th centuries. And if I was to ask you what was the clavichord, you might say that it was the poor man's harpsichord, or the refinement of excellence into a compromisingly smaller instrument. And if I were to ask you what was the spinet, you would probably say the spinet was something that most people could afford. But if I were to ask you who caused the dissolution of the monasteries in King Henry VIII, and who paid the price of it, you might say, well, we don't know who paid the price of it, and we know who caused the dissolution of the monasteries was King Henry VIII. And yet those people that were responsible for carrying it out, were they not in some part to do with the lie that was being told about the onslaught of the Roman Catholic enterprise in religion that was in some opposition to the new church which King Henry VIII wanted to create and called the Church of England? And what is English but the reformation of the texts which were previously written in Italian? What is English except that the music of Mozart, which was once German, has conferred upon the authors of expert analysis and reinvention, reinvented those parts of the Mozart Requiem that he had not been able to write because he was dying. What is it then that produces a spinet that in 1935 a regular 3'9" upright piano was put into a new style case, and the case became known as a spinet and was very dainty looking compared to the old bulky upright. But which kind of story are you telling about your piano that makes it so able to be sold that it is not worthy of you anymore because it has lost your place in your home? It has become so indulgent to the fact that your daughter has run away from her boyfriend that you knew that by buying in its place something that was created by, for instance, more the expertise of Theodore Steinway, that produced, for instance, was it the Theodore version that was created by Theodore Steinway in approximately 1888, where he entered into an agreement with G. Daimler of Mercedes to manufacture parts for the American Mercedes automobile and the engines as well as marine engines. This arrangement lasting until 1906 and had to some extent seen in 1884 the Model B was completed in New York City, the the 31st of January 1894, which was the year that Harrods opened its musical department. It is the very first modern Steinway concert grand piano and salient features developed by C.F. Theodore Steinway. So you say to her, why is your piano so great? I would not answer that in so many words about it. This thing we call is not even love. My piano, you might say, is even worse than yours. Your institutions failed in the Great Depression. Why? Why did your institutions fail to prevent those vestiges of commodity pronounced by Abraham Lincoln of the 1865 American Civil War that equated the nobility in death to the cause of the fight for equality? That how much would you equate that to such righteousness any more than the dissolution of the monasteries by King Henry VIII equated the freedom for one Church of England at the annihilation of some two principal figures regarding the Church of England and its advisory capacity in those estates of Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, executed respectively in 1536 and 1540. That any more establishes a king for your instrument, a king for your prowess, a king version of that piece that you play by Sir J. Rachmaninoff, which you might call or refer to so vocal that it evokes the pathos that is this thing called hate turned into love. How do you then find this hate to be able to find what cross it has to bear that called it so much by any name? What cross is it that you bear when you play your piano that you cannot explain it? You cannot tell by its music how great it is. Is it your fault? Oh, no, it's not your fault, no. Is it the piano's fault? Oh, well, you can't entirely blame the piano, can you, because you haven't practiced. And why did your daughter fall out of love with her boyfriend? Well, because she hated him for the way he treated her piano. Oh no, it wasn't that, was it? No, it wasn't that, because the piano deserved every bit of treatment that he gave it. Something Leonardo, John Leonardo, something out, imagine it. Imagine all the people thumped out on your Yamaha piano. Or what did really cause the dissolution of the Church of Freedom that made you fight and take up arms? That invented almost, did it? Or did it deny the Kalashnikov? Or did it deny the nuclear bomb? Oh, no. It actually acquired weaponry. So much so that its Chinese counterparts were being asked to reinvent it into power in the state of Englishness, which would cause such pursuit of peace, such as one is reminded of that pursuit of peace which was by two treaties of Versailles, which was one, the amalgamation of those corrections which were not made in 1919, that through 20 and 21 became the decongested Treaty of Versailles, which would commit Germany to such reparations that it could only understand more how much it could afford by Weimar, by any republic. And whose republic but for the fact that the reparations were to be paid to the Allies in respect of the Allies, who were the victors of World War I. That we see this disregard, do we, of the Herr Hitler, disregarding the truth about law and order, who was in sum the delinquents ravished on the streets, brawl to brawl and counter to the proclivities of human moderation and political pursuit. Or what puts this man in Lansdowne prison and has him write Mein Kampf? But that has, by this time, 1923, seen almost the rise of the Rhapsody in Blue, the rise of the concert pianist in America, and what causes this dissolution of the monarchy, of the equation of power, this dissolution of wealth, that by 1928 sees Vladimir Horowitz and Sergei Rachmaninoff sit down and perform the new third piano concerto. That, in some respects, was a heavy concert tour performed with the New York Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall on the 13th, 14th, 15th, so of 1928. And to add and purchase a piano, a Steinway instrument of the Immortals with an endorsement by Horowitz. That in 1928, January, they sat down and met in the basement of Steinway Hall, and there played Rachmaninoff's third concerto, and this piece became Rachmaninoff as Horowitz's trademark. The Curtis Institute founded its all Steinway School by 1929, and that also was much deemed to be the year of the crash. That by 1930, the retail price of the Steinway Model D at $3,000 was so far away from the fact that this spinet that you did not understand was not in or part of any Steinway pianos from 1931 to 36, who contained a small number of foremen, office workers, and hundreds of part-time piano makers who ran the Steinway factory. The factory remained officially closed for 2 years, and we are not talking about these 2 years. That period of work was brought back on an as-needed basis, and that was wasting of Hitler by, was it so much, a position that by the acquisition of the state of Chancellor, which was in January 1933, was so anti the reparation treaty carried by Versailles, that had Germany any less right to produce its German pianos, which after all had been, hadn't they, in some part, Steinway, and that enterprise which was of the Steinwegs, who had stayed and remained back in Braunschweig, Seefeld. And we see then who are so dogmatic and diaphragmatic in their sound basis of political expertise that they might ask you to equate what is the pursuit of this IS that has to be equated to any degree of crusade against those forces which are pronouncing a horrible or such horrid ideology that it is waging war. And how do you expect this monster to not retaliate when its construction not only permits tone and travel and more freely to displace beyond borders that air and fraction that creates a lasting peace? How do you expect this monster not to respond? Is measured in the way you play. Is measured in the way you play the third piano concerto, is it, of Rachmaninoff? And your name is Horowitz? I've never heard of you, I'm sorry. And I've never heard you, or we have yet to hear you play your piece on your piano that you claim will be better played by Bayer who is so more proficient than you, and that you do truly believe, do you? I am nothing, seller. My piano is less than worthless. I will tell you why. Since the inception of one or two of the grace notes, shall we say, that were made possible by the escapement action of Sebastian Erard in around the time of Waterloo. When Waterloo, we are talking about before or around 1820. That is Waterloo enough for the one that appointed Wellington as Prime Minister, the General of Waterloo, and that had Earl Grey in 1834 elected without really so much as the elected vote of the people, as much as it was the reformation of Parliament, which actually gave voice to a Prime Minister we had never even seen before, they said. And that had so much hate, was it for Queen Victoria, or was it for the government itself? And all these factions, weren't they fought 100, 200 years before in the quest of monarchy that was King Charles I before his execution in 1649. And I'll tell you why it is. Why you cannot play your piano. On the 1865 1st of June, Senator Charles Sumner referred to the most famous speech ever given by President Abraham Lincoln. And there are 5 known copies of this speech in Lincoln's handwriting. And how do we know it's Lincoln's handwriting? Is we are told it's Lincoln's handwriting. I have personally never seen it, as much as I have never seen your piano, nor heard its notes. And each with a slightly different text, and named for the people who first received them, Nicolay, Hay, Everett, Bancroft, and Bliss. Ah, such bliss. 2 copies apparently were written before delivering the speech, one of them which probably was the reading copy, and the remaining copies were produced months later for soldiers' benefit defense. Despite widely circulated stories to the contrary, the President did not dash off the copy abroad, a train to Gettysburg. Lincoln carefully prepared his major speeches in advance, his steady, even script in every manuscript. It's consistent with a firm writing surface, you are told. As that firm writing surface, not the notoriously bumpy Civil War era trains. And they were bumpy, viewer. They were bumpy. That the additional versions of the speech, you much hear as versions of Parliament and the legality of fighting IS, and the legality of feeding modern-day confusion about authoritative text. And you see about the banned substance, that is, the banned substance or the drug that they use for the pursuit of the moral or the decadent. But you don't hear about the drugs, viewer, on which you are becoming dependent, which are so of the shall we say, the mundane. You would not give them a second look. You would not take this Sprin, or the aspirin, any less by any fear, would you? yet you fear to play that piano. And here is why. This is the speech, is it, by Abraham Lincoln. It is named after Colonel Alexander Bliss, stepson. Historian George Bancroft asked President Lincoln for a copy to use as a fundraiser. Oh yes. Oh, what do you want to raise a fund for when you can have a whole empire commit themselves to the gravestones of our mortal, so heroic warriors that they cannot even speak their name as to how much was heroic and how much was defeatism and how much was pure suicide. That named, believed, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a civil war testing whether their nation or any nation that so conceived and so dedicated can so long endure or can long endure. We are met here on a great battlefield, that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives, and that nation might live. That nation now lives. It is altogether fitted, and propose that we should do this. Do what? Do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, and this speech took 2 minutes. We cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground, the brave men living and dead who struggled here have consequently not struggled any longer. Or how much did they struggle? Have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what they did here. Of course it will never forget what is in the minds of madmen. But you will not be told it as such. Or, I digress again. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they have thus far so nobly carried on. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that perform these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here is highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Except here, we see that this government of the people sees them dead. Scarcely even by this time of Lincoln's speech, even buried, that by the people, for the people, and whose people are the dead expecting you them to bury themselves? Or are these for the people that the dead are expected to be buried by them, and that shall not perish from the earth because they are yet to be killed, or those are yet to be killed, or are not even dead? And it does not surprise me, viewer, that you cannot find it in your heart to play the tune on one finger from Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto, which was played by him and convened in some conference in that place in 1928, which was between Vladimir Horowitz and Sergei Rachmaninoff, that had met in the basement of Steinway Hall. There they played the Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto. This piece, the trademark, isn't it, of American literacy. And you have denied me. And you who deny me are listening to me as you play this piece. It is not Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. It is not the way Vladimir Horowitz would have played my piece, because I have not been involved in any conspiracy to make the dead fight for what they cannot state that they did. Because if you can show me any more what was the fight for equality in 1776 and the American Revolution, which sees the plight of the Red Indian firmly administered by the forces of General Washington, or the forces later, 100 years, that sees the appropriation to the abolition of slavery, that confined so many to so many unbuilt yet tombs, that have so many not as yet even been buried. You are listening, viewer, to yours, your pianist, your, and your. You are listening to your piano, viewer. No, you are listening to your story, my piano. You are listening to it, and you have heeded everything that this girl has said. But I do not doubt that you could not publish it any more than you know the truth about whose own birth sees so many dead and so many yet to be persecuted in the name of righteousness, in the name of a living God. You might need so many martyrs to establish a constitution, but how many constitutional monarchs does it take to bury a whole army of innocent and unpleading, unheard, non-combatants, anti-war heroes, conscientious objectors, and even more does allow such conscientious monarchs, presidents, and great speakers more to become truly pianists, lends only eyes to the might of the human monster that they call this dinosaur, that I have nothing more to say than I have truly already said. I wonder you have not sold your piano before its invention by even Bartolomeo Cristofori had invented it. I wonder why it was ever invented. I wonder what death is conjured up in the might of men and women who claim to support life, but by the way they play can only support the essence and the proclivity of corruption to the expense of the innocent. And how much you've been, how much you have paid for it, how much is paid in the price of truth to so much ignorance and lie that has profoundly made this your story. My piano.